how big of a problem is sexual harassment in France? I know that there's a couple of things that are illegal, but there's no catcall. There's no laws about catcalling. And what do you think is the most likely thing to happen as a result of this, if anything?
It's very hard to predict. What I think is really interesting is how the movement has spilled over from the United States. Just today in Canada, we had a case of a prominent figure in the arts community who has now been accused by 9 women of sexual harassment. And so this whole movement is overflowing into France. My personal feeling about this, just to start off with this, it's very difficult to compare sexual harassment from country to country. And, I'm not an expert on the topic, so I wouldn't really want to venture into that. But this particular controversy going on now with the hashtags, it's about sexual harassment. It's about power. It's about powerful figures and power in all contexts. And I've been reading what the French Facebook site for Balance Tampon, and it's stories of people coming out, women mostly, but not just women, coming out and saying, I was abused, I was harassed, and wondering, why did I play it down all these years, and why did it take this to come out? So, this is something very special and kind of cross-cultural, in my opinion. The two big things in France that are particular are that people joke about sex. It's much more, they're much more forthcoming about joking about sex. So for us, it's difficult to separate that from actual sexism, right? Like people. There are things that I found offensive in France that I talk about in the book that, in their context, with the French and their attitude, are less offensive than I would think. Such as the doctor, going and joking about he and I being locked in a little cabinet, in a little office together. We can't tell anybody we were in here. A very sexual innuendo kind of joke like that. But nobody in North America would make that kind of joke. The French make those kinds of jokes. So, but women in France know the difference. They know what's, and I think that there's as much, it's probably fair to say there's just as much of a problem of sexual harassment in France as there is anywhere else, but it's a big question. I couldn't really answer it. So there's the joking about sex. There's the, it's mostly about the joking.
The relationship to power is different too, culturally. They are a lot more at ease with blunt power than North Americans.
Yeah, but this is something.
No, but it means that it means a different relationship with authority and hierarchy. So it will have an implication on how they would deal with sexual harassment. But I am not a specialist.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it compounds it, but there are things in French society that go against it. And for example, North Americans are very quick to point out that French women had civic rights a bit later than American women or Canadian women. I say it just a bit later. Like American women had the right to vote in maybe 20 years before French women. Sounds great, but in the history of humanity, it's actually quite brief. But what's important is that the French have been doing a lot of things about it in the last 30 or 40 years. They have a lot of laws on representation of women in politics right now that are quite progressive by North American standards. And historically, French women have been present in French history, quite present. You have women, like all the salon culture in France was run by women,
right,
historically. So you have characters of like La Marquise de Rambouillet or Madame de Staël, etc., that actually are hard pressed to find equivalents in any other culture. So you have. And the only place I heard someone tell me, oh, can women talk about anything, was in the United States. The French socially will never admit the idea that there are types of conversations conversations that are for men, and there are types of conversations that are for women. That they do not accept and have never